So for starters, I apologize. There's no intro for this video, nor is it as long as my videos usually are. It's a little bit shorter. I had more material to edit, but time management kind of got away from me in the shop this week, which is somewhat rare for a week in the shop, and I just didn't have time to pull it all together. But I do have an update of the video. This is just kind of showing how those two pieces of veneer that I worked off of either side meet in the middle, and then from the middle you continue the pattern. So you can see I'm just kind of working to hold these together. Once again, I'm still using a piece of veneer to get that edge right, so that the piece I'm adding is on the same plane as the piece that's already connected. This will have a border around the whole thing, so before I was just showing how this is sticking off of the border. And then I could just line those pieces up and then just keep working outwards on both sides. Now you could see once I have this in place, I'm going to consistently have those herringbones in place in order to reference all of the new veneers off of, so I won't have to do that anymore. But making these two side triangles were surprisingly difficult. I kept putting the wrong edges first. In these clips I don't think I show it, but instead of putting it in this position I would mess up and put it the other way. But essentially it was fairly simple, just a trick of the eye that I kept kind of screwing up a little bit. You can see I have a file on hand. All these cuts are not totally perfect, but it was easy to just file the edges of them a little bit because it is veneer, and get everything to line up. Once again, taping as I go. So you can see what I mean by I don't have to use that dummy edge anymore because the edge is in place. And then I could just build out those triangles. Sometimes I would make little cuts on the radial arm saw, but basically this is what the whole piece looks like. So then I had this where I found center, because there is a center where all the edges meet up going across the whole piece. Found center on both edges, and then I could start with the edges. So I'm using a veneer saw and a level clamped to the table to just cut all of these excess pieces off. This is obviously much easier than trying to cut them all to size originally. Just leave the excess hanging and then trim it all to size. So because this is a 1/16 of an inch thick, it does take a little bit of doing to get through. So sometimes I would go through with a sharp razor blade once I had a nice score mark I could follow, and then just trim all these pieces off. And of course this is oak, so oak has very, very textured and dense fibers, so I was careful not to rip any of this because chunks would come off if I did. Then I could tape this down, and I did the other edge as well, and then I could tape this off and do the other edge as well as the long verticals. So for the long vertical pieces, the best I could do with this was tape them together and then rip them down on the table saw. I can only go about halfway under the vacuum bag I have on my shop. So you could see I could go halfway, I could flip it and go halfway the other way. Surprisingly enough, this process worked out fairly well. There was a little bit of cleanup to do, but in general, ripping these two veneers down to get my long pieces, because this table is about 10 feet long, worked out quite well. So then once I had that side ripped, I could tape the whole thing together just like I did with the other veneers, and then rip this edge clean. Now this border is about 5 inches, but once the whole box comes out of the press, I'm going to trim it down and add a picture frame edge on the outside just to have something a little sturdier on the edges. So once I had all this taped together, I could flip it upside down, and that's what the pattern looks like. I apologize. I thought I had footage of putting all these edges on, but I don't. It's essentially the exact same process of taping everything in place. I did the long edges first, taped them in place, and then did the fatter ends as well. Now you could see some gaps in here, but mostly that's just from the veneer pulling up a little bit. I was pretty happy once I flipped this over with how good the pattern looked. So then on that side I'm going to be adding gum tape. Now I was a little overzealous with the gum tape, but this is just because, like I said, this is my first big veneer job. I want to make sure this whole thing stays together. The gum tape, you wet it as you go. They make dispensers for this, but I've been making enough pieces for this, and it was easy enough to just wet it with the sponge as I went. And I'm just putting gum tape on all the seams, and then I'll put gum tape on all the long seams as well. The nice thing about the gum tape is it dries as the moisture evaporates, and it usually pulls the joints together. But you can see this is a very tedious process because I have all of these joints, and I just went through and taped all of these as well. And I got all of these supplies in a kit from that Joe Veneer website, the gum tape and everything. Once that was done, I could go through and remove all of the tape. The gum tape will hold it together and it's ready for veneer. Now, when I ordered the glue for this, I ordered glue for regular veneer. It says right on the bottle you can't use it for 16th inch veneer, which is why I won't be using the vacuum press. I had everything set up and ready to go because I ordered some new glue on Amazon. It's the fastest glue I could get, unfortunately. UF glue, which is urea glue, which is recommended for pattern material like this in the book I got, is not available on Amazon or in stores around me, so I had to have new glue shipped. In the interim, I found some Cascamite, which would have worked, but I just completely underestimated the material quantity that was being shipped, and you'll see even after I mixed the whole thing up that it just wasn't enough. So I ended up getting Unibond, and I'll set this up next week. Unfortunately, the weather has changed, so I'm going to have to get creative with some heating blankets and heating up the shop in order to get it to the right temperature. But you could see I spread out that Cascamite, and it just wasn't going to be enough material. So setbacks like this happen in the shop, but I'd rather do it the right way instead of trying to get away with not enough glue. So when I couldn't get the veneer done, I was waiting for materials. I switched gears and was finally going to do the long aprons. So I planed them up after gluing them together. You can see I just have them laid in place, and I have pencil marks down on this side as well as the other. I'm going to be joining these with simple lap joints. On the trestle table I did in the springtime, I did a little bit of a different joint here, but that was mainly because that table was going to come apart. Because these aprons are all going to be glued together, I went with just a simple straight up lap joint, no fancy joinery. It's super strong and it doesn't remove a ton of material from any of my pieces. So you can see I have these two clamped together, and I'm just going through and making a bunch of curves where those marks were, so I know that these two pieces will be exactly the same and render that base as square as possible. And then I could just remove those curves. This is a terrible camera angle, but I could remove those curves and clean up that joint. So even though I already had marks on these side aprons, I decided to put these back in place and make new marks just so that they were as accurate as possible now that this can kind of halfway lay in there. So this material is about 2 inches, so I came in an inch, and I'll cut an inch off of these. So same process, I had all the marks, but these I did singularly because I removed them one at a time, cut all those curves, cleaned up the curves, and then reattached them to the table. All this material is going to have to be sanded, which I've already done. That is a long process in and of itself. You can see there's a ton of burn marks on this because I was using an old blade. And then once that was done, you could see I could put these long stretchers in there, and then the base is almost done. I still have to add the molding to the pedestals, which I have also already done, but like I said, that won't fit into this video. I just really ran out of time this week. And this is a nice tight, snug fit, which is what I was looking for. And this material is really thick and really wide, so I'm not nervous about this being able to hold up that tabletop, which is quite large in and of itself.